Robin Thurston, CEO of Outside, joining us here on Second Nature. Robin, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Aaron, we were just riffing about our respective overlapping interests and passions, media, content, bikes, and you're in Robin's case. Where do you want to start?
We could go just about anywhere, and I think that's the most exciting. That's the most exciting part about this conversation. We could talk about literally anything from business, outdoor, media, you name it. Let's start with just like a blanket question, though, Robin.
Huh?
What does the outdoor industry need? What do we need to do?
Softball to get started there,
Yeah,
Robin.
yeah. We need to collectively come together. And what I mean by that is like you will never hear me. I mean, I have a lot of people that maybe are critics of what we've done or, things like that. You will never hear me put anyone else down in the outdoor industry. I absolutely believe that everybody that's investing their time and energy in this space is critical to getting more people outdoors in one way or another, right? And so I just at times though feel that there's a little bit too much like, we're not teaming up together to kind of realize the potential that the outdoor industry has collectively, right? And so, I talk about that a lot, like whether I'm, at some conference or on a podcast or whatever, it's like, just remember that we're all trying to achieve the same thing, which is that never in human history have people spent as much time indoors. And the collective of that, in my opinion, is extremely bad for humans, period. It's just bad for humans. We need to be outdoors. We are part of the earth. The only way we recognize that we need to invest in the planet is if we were outdoors. If you're indoors sucking down air conditioning, watching a screen, you're not really thinking about whether or not the trees outside are growing or not, right? So I think that's what the industry needs is like we need to realize that we have collective power and that we're all in this together. It's not about taking market share from one person or another.
What a great positive place to start. Way to go, Aaron, for getting us off on an optimistic foot. Robin, I'd love to, as I mentioned before we got started, I've literally listened to every single podcast you've ever done. So I don't want to make you rehash all the things that I know about you, but you have had a really interesting career. So just compressing it into a nutshell, of course, Map My Fitness, you were very early to the fitness cataloging and mapping game. You sold that to Under Armour. So then you worked internally at one of North America's largest performance brands. And then, of course, you transitioned as you would organically into like biotech or something DNA related before sort of taking over Pocket Outdoor Media. And with that, of course, became Outside. So of course, that was a oversimplification, but what I'd love to hear is maybe like what the through line is there, because it does feel like you've sort of bounced around a lot. And in some cases, you're coming home with Map My Fitness, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But what's the through line of all those different career paths? Like, is there some commonality that's drawn you to each of them?
It probably seems like there, I mean, when you think about jumping into biotech or like my first part of my career after I quit cycling was like 15 years in finance, right? Like I wore a suit and tie every day, you guys, for almost 15 years. And, but the through line there was like when I was at Reuters for a decade, I learned a lot about the media business and a lot about big data and analytics and like thinking about how to build product that really helped. In that case, the end user was things like financial advisors and analysts and things like that. But I learned a lot about building product but I learned a lot about the ad business and when we launched Reuters.com in 2001, like it was one of the very first news platforms that was truly digital and global, that had news everywhere in real time. And so, for me, like it's always been about building product. It's always been about building digital product. It's when I had the chance to start Map My Fitness, it was a lot about taking what I had learned in sort of digital and big data and marrying it with my, sort of, certainly the business angle of it, but it was like marrying it with my love of the outdoors and cycling and, sort of being able to bring all of those things together. And while I had a non-compete with Under Armour, when I left Under Armour, and that's why I got recruited to be a CEO of a consumer genetics company. But, it's sometimes what people don't realize about that with the architecture we built for Helix was that it was a platform where I ran your essentially full genome once, or an exome, which is, a huge amount of data on you as an individual. And then partners would unlock components of that DNA. So like if you went to do a Mayo Clinic test, that was built on top of Helix, or a National Geographic ancestry test that was built on top of Helix. And the through line was that to me, it was still about human performance. It was really about like, how do you think about optimization? How do you think about like, because I always joked when I started Helix, people were like, why genetics? And I was like, well, as I was growing up, everybody was always like, you're like a genetic freak, because I like went uphill fast on bikes. So there was a little bit of like, oh, also for me, it was like really an adventure, because I got to learn so much about, in many respects, like not just genetics, but the human body. And, all the partners we were working with were super interesting, but it was still about digital. We were building digital front end consumer facing products. We were building pipes, how to bring that data to large scales of data to large, platforms like the Mayo Clinic and a whole bunch of people. And so like the through line, and then, I think outside to me was this sort of realization of sort of something that wasn't realized at Under Armour. I mean, we acquired a lot of companies at Under Armour, but I didn't really get to where I wanted to go. Because obviously at the time the core business started to have some challenges when sort of I decided to leave in 2016. And, so coming back to do outside and start to build and piece these companies together is like a little bit what a matter of fact, it's funny. I ran across this email this morning because I was looking for someone's name, and I remember sending out this email to a bunch of people that I knew that basically was like, outside, obviously at the time, Pocket is my opus. Like, this is the thing that I believe that I'm building that can help people, whether you're a beginner. I would say like, yeah, I might be an advanced cyclist, but if you guys went kayaking with me tomorrow, you'd be laughing a lot at me. Like, I would be a total beginner kayaking. Like, let me
Us
just be
too.
clear.
Let's be honest. Us too.
Yeah. So, so depending on where we're at in each one of these, these things that we want to do, like we are beginners in some things and we're, skilled in other things. And so like, how do you bring people along that journey? And so I guess the through to me it's really about the sort of the journey that this active lifestyle person is on. And when I was at Helix, it was like, well, how does this help them? How does this bring them through that? When I was at Under Armour, it was like, all about like what you're wearing and how that can help you. And Matt, my fitness was like, how do we make sure you have the right tools while you're out in the field to have a great experience? So like the through line to me is really that it's how do I keep building amazing products that essentially, help this end consumer have the best experience possible in whatever activity that they want to get into. And so I think that's the through line, is that like my work is far from done, and building teams that can help accomplish that, I think, is another big part of it. Like, I love building the teams. I mean, we're a 415 person company right now. And
Wow.
I don't know how big it could get. I don't know yet. But I'm eager to keep sort of building and creating something that the end consumer can really enjoy.
That's really fascinating to think about the correlation between Helix and outside, in the way that you're basically putting together a puzzle. And it seems like you have kind of an idea of what the puzzle is supposed to look like, but you don't know what pieces are supposed to fit in. And the puzzle could get bigger or it could change a little bit. Do you feel like, if you compare those two going into either opportunity, did you feel like you had a better idea of what the puzzle was supposed to look like at Helix or at outside?
Helix was interesting because, it wasn't my idea, to be clear. Like, Illumina, who was the backer, huge public company, that owned 50% of Helix, the founder, Jay Flatley, who's sort of known as the what I'd call the godfather of DNA. Like he built Illumina, and then he launched two companies. He launched Helix and he launched Grail that does liquid biopsy cancer testing. And so when I got there a little bit, Aaron, like it was like already formed. Like the idea, like it wasn't, we had a lot of work to do, to be clear, to like get that thing to ramp. And then the business ended up pivoting to being more B2B than it was B2C. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to leave. But I think the vision of sequencing the world's population was a very, like, what I loved about it was like how big it was. Like, it was like when I remember meeting with Jay for the first time at his house in San Diego, and I was just like, oh my God. And then we built the largest, whole genome exome lab in the world in San Diego. And I was just like, this is so big, you know. But what I realized was it wasn't my vision. You know what I mean? It was this thing where I had started MapMy, and I would say that a lot of entrepreneurs go through this thing where they sell a company, and I sort of took on, like, I loved Under Armour, you guys. Like, I loved like being with Kevin Plank and like all the sports. I mean, we, at Super Bowls and World Championships, and like it was just, for me, it was like I'm a sports guy. Like, I just loved being at Under Armour. So I kind of like morphed into taking on like the almost the culture of Under Armour and trying to bring digital into it, even though that digital first piece of the digital puzzle was mine. But I still felt like I lost something because I had something that I had created from scratch that I no longer had, and so that was hard for me personally. So the idea that outside is, even though originally it was like the first company I bought was, called Pocket Outdoor Media, and that we owned Velo and Triathlete and women's running and a book company, and and I had started building this technology layer called Rivet. It's actually the user identity system that we have at Outside today. It's called Rivet. It's RIVT, and it comes from this concept of like when you're in the old days and on bicycles, they used to have rivets on the saddle and there were rivets on the front. And so when you were on the rivet, you were like all the way up at the front going as hard as you could go with your tongue sticking out, and so like I wanted to name this user database Rivet. I don't think I've actually ever said that on a podcast before.
I was going to say, this is new. This is a revelation,
yeah,
as somebody who's
so,
absorbed every one of your episodes.
It's funny. A lot of the engineers that are started, like, they're like, why do we call it Rivet? Why is it called Rivet? And like, so I'll explain this, in some of the
that needs to be a public facing brand, Robin, on the Rivet. I mean, that's
we own a bunch of domains around it. For sure. But so like for me, outside was very much like I literally, if I wish I go get it, but I literally have this napkin where I drew this circle about the user. The user was like in the center of it. And then like all of these things that, you as a user do, like first you get inspired by content and then you sort of go to activation and like, okay, so now I've decided I'm going to go do an event, or I'm going to go on a trip. I'm going to go to the Dolomites and ride my bike for a week, Aaron, like it's a big decision when you decide to do that. I got to start training. I got to have a plan. I got to have the right gear. I got to know what the weather is. I got to book my trip. Like these are big decisions that people make when they get into these categories and they decide to either do a triathlon or do a marathon or, whatever it might be. Right. And so I had this napkin, this big napkin that I drew out for the first VC that invested for us. And I was like, this is what I'm building. This is what I'm going to build. And so I feel like outside and frankly, getting MapMy back is like so rewarding because I feel like I get this sort of second chance at like bringing it and really almost maybe fully realizing the vision of what we wanted to build around MapMy. And so, I'm super fortunate to get a second chance to work in this industry, doing something that I love doing. But outside is the opus. Like what we are building at outside to me is the absolute pinnacle of what I believe can be achieved for that end consumer, to help them have the best experience possible in the outdoors.
So it feels like this is the perfect time to then go a little bit deeper on MapMy. It feels to me, Robin, like you were way ahead of your time with that product, especially looking at how people record and publish their training and activity information. You sold that business to Under Armour, as you said. You stayed at Under Armour for a few years before serving that non-compete to go work in the genomics space. So tell the listeners who are less familiar with the story than us, is like, how did the opportunity then come about to where you could reacquire your baby, MapMyFitness, and integrate it into the outside portfolio?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of years ago when they sold My Fitness Pal, because we had acquired 8 companies at Under Armour, so we bought My Fitness Pal and Endomondo and a number of other smaller companies. But My Fitness Pal was definitely like the big one. Like it was bigger than MapMyFitness, right? It had, I think when we acquired it, it had 85 million users on it. It was still growing incredibly rapidly. I know Francisco Partners, who owns it now, is doing well with it. But I basically, after they sold that, I just kind of kept knocking on the door. I was like, well, what are they going to do now? Like, I don't understand. Like, where is MapMyFit in the Under Armour portfolio? And so I just kind of kept knocking. They had some challenges, just because like to rip something like that out of the core, like, identity systems and e-com and all of these things, there was certainly some work. But I would just say, like, I was just very persistent in, if they were going to sell it, like, what better home for it to come back to, the knowledge base of the product, the code, the user base, and so, literally they just, luckily agreed with me. And while it took a long time, just because they had a number of working parts and they had non-competes and with MyFitnessPal and some other things, it took a bit of time. I just, like I said, I'd say I never gave up on the idea that if there was an opportunity to get it back. And I think that push sort of helped. Had great help from several members inside Under Armour. I won't mention their names, but just really helped me kind of navigate the whole thing and help get it done. But just exciting, frankly, to have it back in and have the opportunity. And it really fits in our portfolio. And what I mean by that is we have Trail Forks, which is an amazing product. And Trevor, who's the founder of Trail Forks, still works with us and is doing a freaking unbelievable job. He's, just really cranking on creating new features and really making sure it's the best experience for people. We have Gaia GPS, which is more for the what it calls sort of backcountry, hardcore multi-day, adventure, whether that's skiing, whether that's, hiking, whether that's camping, whatever it might be. And those are both offline products. Like those are both things. And, Gaia has 450 map layers in it. Like you got everything in there from smoke conditions to, avalanche conditions. I mean, it's very much like even search.
I use it almost every day, Robin.
Yeah. Search and rescue teams use it. Like It's a great product, right?
Lucy, do you use Trail Forks?
Almost every day.
Yeah. See, I didn't pay these guys to say that, by the way. I'm just saying that to the audience,
Anyway, keep going, Robin, because I think it is interesting.
MapMy, so to be clear, the way I always used to describe MapMy is like, it was for the average day person. What I mean by that is they're not super competitive. I don't care if you're on MapMyRun versus MapMyHike versus MapMyWalk. It's not super competitive. It's super easy to use. I mean, these are apps in the App Store today that were first. I mean, literally MapMyRun and MapMyRide were apps number 98 and 99 in the App Store in July of 2008. These were the first 100 apps in the store. Okay. So to this day, they're still operating at 4.9 stars with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of reviews all over the world, right? They're used everywhere. We're still adding tremendous number of new users per month to the platform. And they just, in the last 3 years, haven't had a lot of like what I'd call new feature development. They still work very well, but they haven't had a lot of new feature development. So we already have like rebranding is almost done. Android rebranding is already done for MapMy back to like powered by outside and, coming into the ecosystem. iOS will be shortly. But these are like, to me, they fit perfectly because like you have to think of like MapMyRun is still the largest running community on the planet. It's 45 million registered users. And the average person in MapMyRun is not worried about a leaderboard. They're not worried about a segment. They're not worried about any of that. What they're worried about is like getting a map with some data at the end of their run to confirm that they ran 3 miles 3 times a week. Like
Yep.
that's what the average person is. And so like for me, what they fit into is like we call about this like, we have like, if you think about the beginner, the intermediate, the advanced, like MapMy really fits into this beginner intermediate versus like Trail Forks and Gaia are sort of over on the advanced side, right? They're like you got to be kind of along in your journey to use them and maximize them.
Here's a fun fact. The first time I ran a marathon, I used Map My Run. So I was one of the OGs, yes. I guess. The question I have really is kind of ecosystem versus user acquisition, though. So, I understand how you might segment the audience of, more advanced people and more beginner people, but wouldn't it have been easier to put in a layer of tracking of this sort of like entry level stuff into Trail Forks and into Gaia than integrate, 3 or 4 different programs back into the outside portfolio? How is this more of a user acquisition, or is it, expanding out the ecosystem? How do you think about that?
The answer to your question is I actually don't think that would have been easier, because you're balancing this thing of like, people that are using Trail Forks at a certain level, I'd sort of call it intermediate to advanced, mm-hmm. that, when you start putting and simplifying the product at some level, they feel like you're like almost saying like it's not important to you as a business that the app is right for them. Right. So then they are like, well, I'm just going to leave. I'll just go somewhere else where I find the tools and services that I want. So like, I'm not a big believer, to be clear, if you can go back to MapMy, like we didn't have one app. There are some companies out there unnamed that have one app, right? And they think they can service runners and hikers and, everybody under one umbrella. I don't believe that. I believe that these communities are very, very distinct, and they almost have their own sort of like not just community needs, but like brand needs and sort of perception needs of like what is in that application. And I think that does a better job of sort of like, giving them the framework that they need depending on which stage that they're in. Now, the truth is, if you, let's say you are an expert mountain biker today, right? And I consider myself a fairly beginner dog walker. I walk my dogs quite a lot. I use Trail Forks to walk my dog, like no problem. I just record it as a hike and, it's in there, right? So like, it's not to say that I can't use it for other things, right? But I think you have to understand where the entry point starts. Like when a person says, like you just said, I'm thinking about running my first 10K. I just need a really simple app to train every day. Map My Run is probably the best solution for them, frankly, without all the complexities of like competition and, all the things that are in there, right? And so you got to remember that might be the best sort of leap in point for them into the outside ecosystem. And then they can decide to stay there. They could, like, I always say right now, to be clear, MapMy is 91 million users worldwide and still growing. There are more mountain bike rides logged in MapMy apps than there is in Trail Forks, just for clarity. Like maybe 5 or 10x as many.
Wow.
Right. So I know that, see the perception, like the perception is, well, why would I log a mountain bike ride and map my ride? Like that seems like a pretty casual app. But the reality is if somebody started there because they got into cycling and they just use it every day, as you guys both said, you use Gaia every day, use Trail Forks, like you're probably going to open up that app to do the next activity or the next type of thing that you do. Right. So it's in some ways I'd say it's about user acquisition, but to me, it's more about like, what is the community? What is the tonality? What are the features that you're laying out in that product and sort of accommodating to that user group, on a sort of data. Is it complicated? Yeah. Look, I certainly hear about it a lot internally. Like we have a lot of complexity in our business because there are all these different things. Right. But I still feel like it's the best way to service the end user.
I was going to go there next, Robin. So the complexity conversation, I think, is a good one, especially as all of us are actively and practically working on our own businesses. There's probably some good insights here. But of course, outside is an ecosystem. And within that ecosystem, there's a lot of very valuable pieces. As we both just said, we use your mapping services almost every single day. And that's but one of a million different things that you do. And it seems to me as an outside observer is what you're trying to do is create a very valuable ecosystem of products that you pay one singular subscription fee to. So speaking for myself, I would probably pay double what I do for Gaia, and it's one piece of the outside network, and I get all the content on top of it as a subscriber. But it does require a team to work across that entire portfolio. So maybe the question is like, what are the pros and cons of having the ecosystem approach with all these valuable brands and products? Like, what makes it better for the business model, and what are the challenges?
I would say one thing is that like there is a part of it, like there's a part about complexity that is a moat in itself from a business standpoint, right? Like I really like complexity at some level, and I'm not talking about a user experience complexity. I'm talking about a business model complexity, because like I have diversity in my revenue. Like, today when we bought the businesses, they were largely 100% revenue. Now only about 50% revenue, and the other 50% is really reoccurring SaaS revenue in our business, right? Subscription or SaaS. So like between event registration and the membership. And so, from my perspective, that diversification of the business actually creates more stability for everybody in it, right? So like we have very high retention rates on our subscriptions. We have very high retention rates on our SaaS businesses. Advertising is a little bit more like this, right? It's a little bit harder, quarter to quarter, month to month. So my view is like the complexity gives you it gives you a little bit of a moat, gives you a little bit of safety and security, so that you're not sort of one business goes isn't doing well, and all of a sudden you're just like it's a train wreck, right? So I think that diversity helps. But we're also trying to, if I think about what's going on in the media industry, I mean, you guys are, this, like, it's not easy. Like, this is getting traffic, maintaining traffic, how you think about the top of the funnel and how that converts into, paid subscribers or viewership. We got a lot of competition, I just say a lot of competition, and I mean competition in that how people can spend their time, right? Like people can decide to spend their time on Netflix, and that is competition for me, right? People can spend their time on, a video game, on Minecraft, and that's competition from my perspective, right? So we have to figure out ways to build a product. And in some ways, the complexity helps because maybe, like, I use an example, like maybe during the winter, you're like watching World Cup events on streaming with us. You're, reading Ski Mag. You're interacting. You go to a Warren Miller film. So like that's one way to engage with us. And then all of a sudden, if all I had were those three businesses, man, April's going to look meager, you guys. Like it's not going to be great,
Yeah.
right? But now I'm like, okay, Aaron and Dylan are going to switch to mountain biking or climbing or, road cycling, whatever it is. And I sort of transition you into that. And I have another product that, like, I'm using an example, if I got Land Rover as an advertiser, I can be like, look, Dylan and Aaron are over here in snow. And then all of a sudden they transition to the spring and summer. I got more for you to connect with them on, right? Like more things that we can do. So I like the complexity. My team always doesn't, say that sometimes it's hard. But like I think it's important for our business in terms of how we're thinking about it. And I would say that it is our goal to get the sort of subscription SaaS businesses to be like 70-75% of the revenue, because again, advertising continues to be a very, very hard place to play. Like it's not going to get any easier. Google, if you think about the market caps of Google, Facebook, etc., they are just going to keep piling that cash on to how to bring more of that. And I don't care if it's TV advertising, I don't care if it's digital. They're just going to keep piling it on, right, to get more and more of that revenue, right? So I think I'm just very realistic that ads is a challenge business, and the media side of that is still, it's still challenged. Luckily, again, we have diversity so that we don't we don't have the same stress that if I was a media only company. I'm not. I consider outside a platform company. And that is, I think really, really important for the future of our business.
I want to go back to that thing. You were just talking about seasonality and the overlap. A lot of people, in the winter, we're snowboarders and skiers. In the summer, we're mountain bikers and trail runners, and it kind of goes through. And obviously, there's a lot of kind of sub brands within Outside. We've talked about Guy, we talked about Trail Forks. How do you think about developing sort of the anchors to the brand when it comes to Outside? Obviously, you have events like the Outside Festival. How do you think about kind of balancing out how you're developing these sub brands to how you're developing the entire Outside brand?
Well, so I think going back to that picture I was talking about at the beginning, like the core of it is that, on our platform today, with the exception, we still have to bring MapMy into this, right? Right now, you have one profile. Like you have one profile that lives everywhere in the system. You have one user account that lives everywhere, whether you're on Trailforks, Gaia, Outside Online, wherever you are, right? And then we're building this sort of universal profile that keeps all these stuff in there. Like if you go register for an event, you have results, that's going to be on your profile automatically because Bike Reg is synced in with your profile. If you go, I'm using example, watch a Warren Miller film, that's going to be on your profile, and potentially you can share that with the people that follow you. So you can be like, oh my God, I just got so stoked on skiing watching Warren Miller. Like you should watch it too. We want to get people into that transaction. So this idea of the universal profile and sort of universal login across the system is really key for how to think about the sort of platform as a whole. And that's all synchronized now. I mean, you guys go follow 5 things or 3 things on the platform. Like it's all in the feed. It doesn't matter if you go to ski, go to Trail Forks, it's all the same feed, right? It's like you're getting all that stuff back. So that, and by the way, that took a long time to build. I mean, we built it all in-house, homegrown. We got a lot of new features coming that, are still rolling out, like new things like video is going to be rolling out soon, UGC video, all of that's coming. It took a long time to build. And so now I think people are like, at least the people that I talk to, that like there's the people externally that haven't used the platform that are like, we don't understand what Outside's doing. But if you go actually, like if you and I start following each other, which I will, if you guys are on there, like right after this, like you can see the power of the platform pretty quickly. You can be like, oh, I got to see Robin's rides and I got to see what content he's reposting and I got to see what he's liking, like you start to see the power of the platform pretty quickly. And I think that is, as I think about the individual brands, I want to be clear, like they are really important. And I go back to that idea of like a ski magazine reader has been like ski magazine has been around for over 80 years, right? So like they're loyalists. They're like, I want to see the content on ski, right? And so I think that's where we want to keep those brands very, very clearly on the platform. But the future of the platform is that, as an example, let's take, Free Trail as an example. I have no problem right now, and I will promote your brand. I'm saying I will put you in the queue as a suggested brand on the platform. I have no problem if you want to put content links and UGC into the feed and drive people back to your site. I have no problem. That I want you to do that. I want the reader, if they find value in Free Trail or any other publication, I want them to be able to get to that content, because to me, what it's going to do is inspire them to get outdoors, right? So whether it's our brands, Aaron, or it's other brands on the platform, I mean, I think already, I just looked yesterday, I think we have about 75 brands that are in the queue right now to start being, recommended on the platform. And, by the way, like we launched, 6 weeks ago, we have brands on the system that already have hundreds of thousands of followers.
Really?
Yeah. So like, I don't know what your social presence looks like in other channels, but I guarantee you in a shorter amount of time, you'll have a big following base if we recommend you in the Outside network. I mean, we have 100 million registered users, right? So like I'm putting it in front of them very differently than Instagram, who has millions of brands that they got to showcase and, put out there. I'm putting you in front of our users in a very different way.
So interesting, isn't it, Aaron? I mean, one of the things, Robin, we talk about all the time as two, small time creator media operators ourselves is the importance of figuring out what the bottom of your funnel is. And if it's advertising, it's going to be tough sledding no matter who you are. And so reframing Outside as a platform company instead of a media company is, it creates a different model through which to view your business and to orient the team around. You've mentioned now the activity feed. This is the new feature that has been rolled out in the last 6 or 8 weeks. Maybe be a little bit more specific about it. Like, what's the value prop for the user? And I should say, like, I view myself as the prototypical, like the archetype of an outside consumer or subscriber, in that, like, I use Gaia all the time. I read trail running articles, and on the rare occasion it's like, oh, this looks like an interesting ski thing, I'll read that. But I would absolutely never subscribe to Ski Magazine personally, or to
of course.
Pink Bike personally. But when I have the subscription and I get value out of it, I'm happy to read those one-off articles. So anyway, with that as your prompt, sort of like this activity feed, it feels to me like maybe brings some of the complexities of the business and refines it or streamlines it in a way that improves the user experience.
It's that for sure, Dylan, that we are trying to make it easier on the consumer to get to all that. But I also think there's like a really important distinction, which is, we for a minute there, we talked about brands being on the platform, right? If you look at the biggest change that we made is that every, author, creator, freelancer in our system is now followable, right? So like the old world, do you guys know who Alex Hutchinson is? He's like a science writer. Yes, yep. I love Alex. I love, and I literally, I think on every podcast I mention Alex.
Yep.
But like, and by the way, if you haven't read his book, it's like amazing. It's
Endure is what it's called.
Endure. Yes.
We have a sort of a book club here, and Alex just posted, I saw on Twitter the other day that he just announced his next book. I'll pull up the title, but keep going, Robin.
If you think about in the old world, right? So Alex has written for us for a long time. And if Alex had new content, I wouldn't really know when it was going to land on Outside. I mean, how would I know? Like, I don't know. Is he going to post once a week? Is he going to post 3 times a week? Does he got a big story he's working on that's going to take a month? Like, I don't know. Right now, I can follow Alex in the feed, and I know that I'm going to get that update. And soon there's going to be features like, there's going to be features like where you can say, summarize Alex's last 5 posts and put them into an email to me at the end of the week, like where you can summarize up for that creator and have that sort of come to you in summary format, right? So like, you could have that cadence be, I want all Alex's stories once a month. I want them all in a week. I want to get push notifications every time a new one comes out because I'm so into Alex's writing, right? But then on top of that, if Alex wants to, like, let's say he's on location doing like, some sort of research project, and he wants to post photos into the feed that are like you wouldn't get in the story because you can't put all the photos in the story. He wants to post behind the scenes, photos. He wants to post links to some research that he did. He wants to post up a video about launching his new book. Like he's like, hey, I want to tell the outside audience, I got 100,000 followers. I want to tell the outside audience, what's happening. We're going to make all that possible. Like basically, like that's all in the feed. So if I'm really into Alex, like that's very different than following Outside as a brand or Ski Mag as a brand, right? Like I'm getting down to like, this individual is what's really important to me within the brand, and I want to get all of that stuff. Right? So that's kind of what we're creating. But on top of that, we're going to start launching things like, let's say that I'm using an example. Let's say that either you, Dylan, or for Free Trail, you guys create a brand and you start posting stuff up and links to stories and things like that, right? Soon, you're going to be able to launch a challenge to your followers. So like, hey, I want to challenge my audience using Trailforks, Gaia, or MapMy to a 30-day challenge where my audience engages for 30 days, and I'm going to give something away, or like you're going to get special access to me, or things like that. Surveys, pop quizzes, all this stuff we're going to launch so that creators can do that. But here's something else you can do today that you can't do easily somewhere else, is you can go on to Trailforks, going back to my original MapMy thing, or MapMy, you can go create a map. Like I can just say, hey, Aaron, let's go meet here. And I can post that into my feed like that, right? Like I can't do that easily on Instagram. And by the way, if it's on Instagram, it's a picture. and I can't interact with that. What do I do as a user? Do I go download the map? Like, how do I interact with that? So what we're doing is we're going to bring all of these features together so that that creator or the brand that's represented on the platform can use all of those different things to engage that community in a totally unique way that you can't do on another platform. I'm sorry, there isn't anywhere else to do that, right? At least not that I'm aware of.
This is awesome. I'm taking notes. I got some ideas. I'm about to light up that thread.
Exactly. I love it.
I mean, I think one of the hardest parts about being a content creator in general and being what I've got to assume it's like in your position is that there are so many things that we want to have when it comes to creating content, to creating functionality, to bringing brands together and everything like that. What is the filter that you use to say no to opportunities?
We need coaching on this, Robin.
Yeah. Look, I say no to a lot, but what I would say is I say no to a lot of things. Like, I mean, if like somebody comes to me trying to sell their business and it's like in a completely different vertical, like, we had somebody come with an equine business. They wanted us to buy an equine business and put it on top of outside. And I'm like, I'm not there yet. Like, I'm not saying never. Like, I love horses. I love horses around the outdoors. I want people to ride horses, but I'm like, we're not ready to do that. Right? Like, we're just not, like, we're not there yet. That's not like the core category of things that we're in. Right. So I would say like I'm pretty refined in how I say no to things that don't really fit within the core sort of thesis of what it is that we're building today. Right. It doesn't mean never. It just means not today. When it comes to like, we are trying to do a lot. Like we just had our offsite for 25 planning around the product, and there's a lot of different initiatives going on across the company. And I think what I've tried to do is like set a structure. Like, I'm using examples. So like one group comes and says, well, I really want to launch some group functionality. I'm just using this as an example, right? Like, I really want to build, and I'm like, okay, no problem, but build it as a service. So like an example would be is like, let's say we have more group functionality on Gaia, like where you can invite people and you can share maps more easily and the map packs you create and stuff like that, right? Build the functionality so that it's a service, so that if all of a sudden, say, Backpacker wants to launch group stuff, that they have the technical infrastructure to do it very, very easily. So I would say that it's really important to set up sort of guidelines around, like, because if you just go free for all, every team's on their own, you're just going to have a mismatch of like how all this stuff works together, right? So like a good example is you can't launch a new product outside unless you're using the authentication, the profile, the single membership. Like, you got to use those things. That's like a standard, right? So I think in any business, how you come up with that framework of like how you're going to operate, sort of like the operational cadence and structure, is super important and allows you to say no to some things.
Awesome.
I say yes, just to be clear, I say yes to a lot.
It's sometimes hard to say no in today's day and age, as things are moving and innovating so much. It feels like there's infinite opportunity, and focus becomes the hard part. And maybe speaking about expansion, maybe this is a good time to talk about Outside Fest. We've talked about only digital things so far. I was not at Outside Fest personally last year, but I heard it was a crazy success across, any number of different vectors, however you would measure it. So, Robin, tell us about what the inspiration was to create Outside Fest. If my characterization is accurate, that it was a big success, how you guys are looking ahead to expand that model in 2025.
Yeah, I sort of say we have two big initiatives. We have one sort of spring, summer, and one in the winter, fall, winter, which is obviously the Warren Miller Theater Tour, and like, getting out on the road and, going to hundreds of theaters. And we're going to transition that a little bit more into like a sort of winter festival a little bit. Like, we want to almost make it bigger as we go through that journey of connecting with people, but like more to come on that a little bit. But with the festival, the Outside Festival, The idea really stemmed from I lived in Austin for 7 years when I built Under Armour Digital down there and MapMy, and I was going to South by every single year, and I guess I was sort of struck in the outdoor industry, and I've been to OR many times, I've been to Interbike, I've been to Eurobike, I've been to a lot of different events, but I was always struck like you guys, like the outdoor industry has the coolest shit. Like we got great gear, man. Like I don't care which category you're in, like you can geek out on climbing gear, you can geek out on mountain gear, you can geek out on, I mean there is great gear, right? And yet consumers have very little access to it until it ends up on a showroom. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, what about all the experiences? Like, what if I'm a beginner climber and I just want to like come meet some of the great climbers and like climb with them? What if I want to, like this year, I think we're going to have this this beginner fly fishing demo thing out there. Like, what if I just want to try that, for the very first time with like an expert, like somebody that really knows what they're doing, just to dabble. Like, I don't know that I'm going to drive up to the mountains and, get all the gear and do all this stuff, but I just want to try it. So there's like this combination of like, how do you take a film festival, an ideas festival, a B2B event, music, which to me is critical. Like I saw that at South by, what people were drawn in by was like, oh my God, they're playing there. Like I'm going to go for all the digital marketing stuff, but man, I'm staying the rest of the week. I'm seeing these bands, right? Like so like music was a big part of it, experiential, like like North Face is doing this big climbing wall they did this big climbing wall competition, hopefully doing it again this year, that we had broadcast on outside television. And so like to me, bringing all of that together in my hometown, like being in Denver, grew up a stone throw from the park, Civic Center Park. It was just a really big vision from the standpoint of like, could we create South by Southwest for consumers? We expect that the city, the state have leaned in again this year. We have a huge partner announcement that's coming up that's going to be the title sponsor this year, which is going to just bring more energy to it. We have I would say so many of the brands that were there already are coming back for sure. We expect this year to be 35,000 people. The bands are, when you guys hear the band announcements, you're going to be like, damn, it's because it's amazing. Like I'm so excited for who we got this year for the two, sort of leads. And obviously we'll have a lot of other great bands in and around those, the two, on Saturday and Sunday. But it's just really about building an event that is a cultural moment for the outdoors where everybody can congregate, get together, have some fun, experience new things, see great, cool gear, try some things. Like I have this funny video where like we were doing a tire changing contest last year, and like everybody was out there. I'm like, if I was 12 years old and I walked down and saw this festival and I went to the festival, like that would have been super cool just for the first time to learn how to change a tire. So like things like that and the experiences around that, and I couldn't be more appreciative of the state of Colorado and the city of Denver for them really leaning into this vision and sharing it with me. And I'm super psyched to see what year 2 is like and year 3. And I believe that we can have 100,000 plus people, a tight style event, global event around the outdoors in the next 10 years. I believe that.
Aaron, are we going to go like host a B2B job fair or panel discussion?
Yes. That was actually funny. So the Basecamp held we had a job fair, and there were like 700 people in line. Yep. I mean, it was just off the hook. It was amazing.
I think that's the most important part about the outdoor industry. And obviously, we are among the most committed to it, but really not just experiencing the outdoor industry, but being able to contribute to it by becoming, part of it, working for a brand or developing content or whatever we can do to help people get into the industry side of things feels just as important, if not more in certain cases. Obviously, we want to get people outside to be riding and running and doing whatever, but we also need the creative minds, the infrastructure, the support to make all this content happen, to make these events happen, to make the brands and products come together too. So
Yeah.
the job fair element of it, I think, is equally important. Big fan.
Yeah, that was, it was a big hit. It was a big hit.
One question putting on a festival like that is obviously an investment, and that's probably an investment that's going to take a couple years to really get up and running. And if you look back at the beginning of this whole discussion we've had, the original investment was probably just collecting all these brands under one roof. So you've gone from that to now investing in bigger events where you can anchor and pull people together. Where are you looking now for not just like financial, but your time investment when it comes to growing everything that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, look, the vast majority of our investment is still going into the platform, like just continuing to build this platform. And we have, I mean, again, if you're on the platform and you're interacting with it, you'll just see how much is even coming in the next 2 quarters. Like we have tons of releases coming out in Q4, tons of releases in Q1. So that's like never going to stop at this point, Aaron. I mean, we have roughly 110 people in product and engineering today. So like we got a lot of people working on this stuff, and that means a lot of new things coming. And I want to make it great for, I want creators to be able to launch and, make money on the platform too. Like, if I think about the future of Outside, I think about like being the Patreon or the Substack of the outdoor industry, right? And the difference with us is that we can build audience for you because we got a lot of traffic, right? So we want you to monetize on the platform. Like we want that, right? Can I build another Riverside? Like I don't know. Like we might plug in and have a partner for something like that, or let people load the podcast after they're done producing it, right? I mean, I'm not, we can't do everything, right? But the idea is to build enough features and enough differentiated features that really keep driving the platform forward. When I think about, what are other things that we're, investing in? I mean, we obviously, I mean, I'm definitely a huge believer in storytelling. I think it is a lot about storytelling. So we're still we're investing in things like Warren Miller, and, the Warren Miller 75 was a big investment, to be clear. Like, and luckily we will do well this year because the movies, we've had good reviews, and, tickets are selling well, across the board. And so, we're again fortunate from that perspective that we can drive people to theaters, using our traffic. So content distribution is something we're still investing in. But when I think about something like the festival, and it, certainly last year was an investment on our part. I think we got 1.3 billion impressions out of it. So I'd argue it was a pretty good marketing investment for us. Just from a brand visibility perspective, but. Very much we want that business to be its own business on its own right, growing at a good clip. So, we'll, even though we made some investments, we hope in the next, year or so that it will, maybe by, the following year to be, fully sort of self-sufficient, and growing. And we have big partners there. Like we use Groundswell out of Chicago for all of the activations. We use Superfly for all the music. They do Bonnaroo and, Outside Lands and other big events. And so, we're trying to do it right. I think you do have to do things that are very high quality. And we'll probably, look, we've made some mistakes. We've invested. I love, there's a great saying when Jeff Bezos was asked about the Fire Phone, like his whole staff, like they're like, we're going to shut down the Fire Phone. And they were investing, I mean, just ridiculous amounts of money in trying to get a phone off the ground. And somebody in the staff says, well, like, that was such a waste of money. Like, what a failure. And Jeff looks at him and goes, our next failure is even bigger. Like, I mean, like, we're not going to not innovate because of the fear of failure, right? Like, the next one might even be a bigger crash and burn, right? So, like, that's kind of my theory. I mean, I think there was a lot of skeptics around the Outside Festival, and I think, it paid off and, worked really well. And I think a lot of people were like surprised. They were like, wow, like Outside really pulled that off. But I'd say that like we're not going to stop innovating, and I try not, like I said, there are critics, there are people that want it to be the way it used to be. There, people that say, like they don't want the change, they want it to be like, the way it always was, and I'm like, that's just not the way the world works, like in my view. And so, like, I think as entrepreneurs, you have to just keep innovating, you have to keep pushing. You have to have failures. Like I'm not going to listen when somebody critiques me for a failure, because I learned a ton from that, and I hope the team learned a ton from that. Because maybe the next failure is even bigger, and that's okay too.
Hell yeah. The next failure's bigger. Robin, our most popular podcast on Second Nature was entitled Business is Hard, where Aaron and I just lamented all the failures of swings that we've taken that were complete airballs. So,
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, next failure's bigger. I think that's a good
Next failure is bigger, man.
psychological orientation. We can
I
start
know.
winding down here. One thing I'd love to just kind of close with, maybe, you've mentioned the team a few times. You said, I love building the team. You also mentioned it's over 400 strong. A quarter of those people, it seems like, around product and engineering. As a CEO, like, that's probably your biggest focus, is building the team, maintaining the culture. You've been in leadership roles for basically your whole career, it seems like. What have you learned about that team building and that culture building over the course of your career that maybe some of our listeners could adopt?
It's really hard. Like, you know, I've had many, again, interviewing's hard. Finding the right fit for the organization is hard. I don't care which business you're in. Um, you know, I certainly had some epic fails where we hired people and it didn't work out. And, like, whether that be on my direct team or, people in the team. So I think you can't take it for granted. And, we are remote first. So, like, we have not moved back to any, which in some ways I miss. I miss more in person. Like, I miss having the team around you and being able to riff on things. And so we try to get together in person, like, even my direct team at least once a quarter. And when you have budget constraints, usually travel gets cut quick, right? Like, it's the first thing to go, which is really hard in a remote culture. But I aspire to try to allow the teams to meet as frequently as they can, to get a lot of stuff done and then go back, to their respective homes and, work out. And we have very little office space left. I mean, I think at the peak I had 800,000 square feet of office space, and now I have like 80,000. So we have a tenth of what we had at one point. So we're very much remote first, which I think is important. I mean, I think about, people that have families and, you know, schedules and taking care of parents and, all of these things. And I think that it's important to remember that, travel time to and from work is a challenge, right? The flip side of that is it's a challenge not to be in person from a cultural perspective. I think a bit too, because, there's disconnect from, quote, a company when you just, you're always on Zoom, right? Type thing. And so I think there are challenges both ways. We've decided to, certainly stay remote first. But I think I spend a lot of time like recruiting. I'm constantly, if we're looking for a role, I'm reaching out on LinkedIn and saying, hey, would you like to get together? If I'm in a location, I'll try to see people when I go there. Like, I'm going to LA and Phoenix soon. And, like, I'm trying to see potential future, people that might be involved in the business down the road when I go to those spots. But I just say you can't take it for granted. Like, you have to kind of nurture those relationships. There are things I'm good at and things I'm bad at. Like, I think, I hope that I, have a good rapport with my, certainly my directs and the team as a whole. But, I'm not good at celebrating. Like, I'm really bad at it, actually. Like, it's like something happens that's great, and I just, like, move on to the next thing. Like, I'm like, okay, what are we doing next? Like, okay, we got to that finish line. Now, where's the next one? And so,
Yeah.
like, sometimes I wish I was better at celebrating. And I encourage, like, entrepreneurs, when I talk to them about their businesses, to think about celebration, because those moments are, for most entrepreneurs, they're fleeting. And what I mean by that is, like, first of all, I mean, the idea, like, at this point, I've had one exit, to be clear. Like, I've one exit. I'd say successfully navigated and transferred Helix over, and it's doing well to this chief science officer, who's now CEO. I think outside we certainly put the business in a position that I think we can win in the long run. But, this idea that's been built up around entrepreneurialism, that, like, you can go and have 3, 4, 5 big exits. Like, first of all, everything takes way more time than you think. I mean, everything. I like, I bought all these companies and I'm like, oh, we're going to have like the whole tech platform done in a year. It's been 3. We just launched it. Like, you guys, I mean, when I pitched the Series B to Sequoia, I was like, yeah, no problem. We're going to like 2 years max. Like, we're going to definitely have this out. They invested 3.5 years ago, so
Yeah.
it's like everything takes more time than you think. Everything takes more capital than you think. Always, like it just does. Like somebody's coming to you going, oh, we thought that was going to be 100K and it's going to be 300, whatever it is, right? There's a lot of, I certainly believe we've tried to treat the employees well, and from the acquisitions, and most of them make more money than they did before the acquisitions. And we give everybody equity ownership. Like if there's one piece of advice I have for entrepreneurs is everybody needs equity at some level, because to me, when there's an outcome, it just makes all the difference to them understanding the power of building an organization. So like, I give advisors equity. I just try to have everybody along for the ride, because I think that's really important when you're building a company.
Well, Robin, it's great to get to know you, man. Appreciate you
You
coming
too.
on the show.
We will see you at Outside Fest.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. Like, let's figure it out. Maybe guys do a podcast on site and
Yeah.
get some of the athletes there and stuff. But no, I would love to see you guys there. You have my personal invite.
Yeah, and of course, like we have millions more questions, so maybe we could make this like an every 6 months type
Sure.
revisiting.
Yeah.
Because
we'll have some big failure that I can announce every 6 months. Yeah.
well, also just like the trends and changes that are happening in media, like the advent of AI. I'm sure is something that you think about all the time. We don't even need to open that can of worms right now, but there's a lot that's changing, and you have a lot of experience, and you're certainly stewarding one of the most important institutions in the outdoor industry. So good luck with everything that you're working on. Thanks for coming and sharing some insights with the audience.
Anytime, guys. Thank you so much for having me on.